everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I make PC tech and hardware related content, so if you're new to that, consider subscribing. So if you've seen my videos in the past, you probably realized that I have been working on a project, and I can happily say that this is finally it. So hopefully you guys are excited as I am for this computer, because it's gonna mean a lot, this whole build for me, because one, it's my first time actually making a video, a build guide for this. That I've been meaning to do for a while, and two, it's actually going to be replacing my main computer rig, kind of like an upgrade. Without further ado, I don't want to hold it off too much because I want to get started and showing you guys how to build a computer and how I went across choosing the parts and building my own main rig. Okay, so I have a lot of boxes just that have been sitting in my room for this project for a while now. I think it's only fair that I present the parts that I'm gonna be using and kind of why I chose them, considering the reason I'm building the whole computer is kind of for like a bit of basic content creation purposes, and then mostly the gaming purposes. Let's start with the CPU. The CPU is a Ryzen 5 3600, 6 cores, 12 threads, a 3.6 gigahertz base to a 4.2 gigahertz boost clock. Kind of a great value for performance processor. Well, probably one of the best out there, considering it's gonna give me an edge in a lot of the basic content creation that I want to get going on and maybe going in the future, because I definitely want to make this future proof. B450 Aorus. Now this obviously was recorded when B550 came out. However, this is a very good cheap option. Honestly, I don't know if I can recommend, because it is not available or not even at a rational price, but this should be around $80 to $90. Power supplies that are definitely needed in a computer are very rare, and if they're not rare, they're very overpriced to find. I essentially got a power supply, a 450 watt power supply from EVGA, used, not that used though. I can make a whole separate video on buying computer parts used. Usually it's not considered the greatest thing to do. Actually, in some cases, especially with power supplies, it's actually considered taboo. But I will mention, if you know what you're doing, know how to do it, you could find like a pretty good deal. And I'm not that into buying used. Matter of fact, this is my first project buying used. So I actually scored this with someone that used it about like 2 weeks or something, and they just got rid of it, and I've tested it already, and it works. So next thing I want to talk about is the storage. To start out, I know I won't be using that many games or that many apps or programs and things like that, so I went with a simple SSD from Crucial, and is the MX500. I don't know if that's a model or a series, pretty sure it's a series, but it's 250 gigs. MX500 is known for being having a reliable microcontroller, which means the more that you cram into it, basically, the more stable it will be in its speed. So it won't slow down as you use the storage, which is very important, and something that most cheaper budget SSDs tend to lack. It's not a huge difference, but I definitely want something reliable, as it's the only option or drive that I have in the computer as of now. As I will definitely use more than 250 gigabytes in the computer, I do plan on upgrading it to a 2 terabyte hard drive, as I have had in the past. But for now, I think it's a great start until I can save up like 50 bucks until that. Memory, you can't forget about the RAM. This is 16 gigabytes of 3200 megahertz. And if you haven't seen some of my other videos, I tend to bring up a lot of higher clocked memory, simply because in RYZEN builds, which is the kind of processor that we're using in this computer, they certainly tend to rely on a lot of higher clocked speeds in your RAM. Not only just dual channel or higher gigs, but higher clock speeds will definitely work. And it's RGB, so like I said, I did keep some aesthetics in mind for the computer. Next up is the graphics card. Easily, in this case, one of the most expensive purchases I had to make, and not really one of the hardest, I'll be honest, because it is an RTX 2060 Super, as you can see by the box right here. No surprise that a lot of these parts are not in stock or just crazy above MSRP. One, I was just lucky enough to find it, and two, I was able to find it at a good price because it was actually refurbished by Amazon. So I was able to find it for like 40 or 50 bucks below the usual MSRP. For being an RTX 2060 Super, we're getting ray tracing in a pretty budget build, and I think I couldn't really go wrong with this. Lastly, but definitely not the least, is one of the most annoying and tedious purchases I think I had to make, really just because of the shipping. It is a Dark Flash DLM21 mesh black case. One of my favorites, price-wise and aesthetics-wise. You really can't go wrong with it. Number one reason for death of new components and stuff like that when building a computer is none other than static electricity. And it's not very common, but it is possible. You're probably gonna wanna use some sort of anti-static bracelet or something like that, or just ground yourself before you get started. Definitely great to start off with the processor and the motherboard. Okay, so you'll want to be pretty careful with not grabbing it from behind. You don't want to damage any of the pins on the back. We install the processor by lifting this little lever out and then up, and then we now can simply drop the CPU in there. Pretty simple. You don't want to bend these pins whatsoever. What you want to do is find the golden right triangle on the processor, and it'll line up with a triangle right on this side of the board. All right, you shouldn't apply any pressure to it whatsoever. It'll literally just fall in, and as long as it doesn't wiggle around, it's installed. And then I'll just push the lever back down with a little bit of pressure, not too much. And that's literally it. To install the cooler now, we're gonna remove these two brackets because we don't need them, they're in the way. This is where our screws will go in for the cooler that comes with the processor. Luckily, we have thermal paste already pre-applied onto our cooler. These little standoffs right here are provided by a back plate that should come with your motherboard. When installing a cooler, all it is lining up these screws on each corner right before you place it on the CPU, making sure they're lined up. So what we want to do is screw these in diagonally so we apply even pressure onto them. All right, so as you can see on all those, I screwed all four corners in order diagonally until I couldn't really screw them any longer. And now, just to test it out a bit, you want to make sure that you were able to pick the motherboard off the cooler. That's a simple test to know that it's screwed in properly and the cooler won't come off the motherboard, because that's the last thing you want once you have this computer built. And now, as you can see here, I'm gonna plug this header into the CPU fan header right here. All right, so next up is the RAM, 16 gigabytes, 3200 megahertz is what we have. And this is probably one of the simplest installations out of the whole computer, in my opinion. These DIMM slots and these RAM sticks all have a little bit of a gap in between. You're gonna open up the second and the fourth if you have 4 DIMM slots, and you wanna line up where this will go. All you simply wanna do is push down. So same thing for the other one. You're gonna line it up and they'll both click and close by themselves. You don't close them with your finger. Once you push them in, they'll click automatically, and that's how you know it's installed. So for now, guys, this is really it. This is all the work we have to do in the first phase of the motherboard. What I'm gonna do is gonna set this aside and bring out the case. This is gonna be interesting to take out. Our work is done with the motherboard. We have work to do in the case. Now you're gonna get a lot of installation guides and stuff like that, but you have this video, so you don't need to worry about that. What you do need to worry about, however, with the case is that you'll have these cables that route back here, which will lead to your HD audio and your USB 3.0. The other set of cables that you'll have to worry about in a computer are the power supply cables. We need to bring in the power supply first in order to have the motherboard installed and then connect the cables, and that way it's just much simpler. Cases have power supply and the power supply shroud on the bottom, and in order to access that, we have to access the back panel, which is usually just like a metal back plate. Save your screws. These are gonna be essential. With this, now we have access, as you can see, to the back of the case. These are in fact the cables I was talking about. HD audio, USB, this is USB 3.0. These are your power LEDs for the power button. This could be intimidating. All this and all this you have to deal with, but it is not that hard. You basically have to worry about these cables that I'm about to mention. This is the power cable. obviously to plug into your wall. This one is the 20+4 pin, which connects to your motherboard, gives juice in order for that to work. Your SATA, which gives juice to your storage, whether a hard drive or an SSD. 4x4 CPU pin, your PCIe, which will connect to our graphics card. So make sure that we don't really care about these cables just yet, so we're gonna put these aside. We want the fan facing down. It'll go in with a slide and a little bit of a push. And then if we turn the case around, this is where we screw it all in. So now that we've installed the power supply, the cables are running out here, and we have our case cables running out through the shroud. Now what we need is to actually put the motherboard in here. That way we can start connecting everything, and the last few bits like the graphics card and our fans will be installed at the end. Before we can do any of that motherboard installation, we have to put the IO shield on the side, and it'll look like this. The installation is pretty simple. You need to make sure that your audio ports are usually at the bottom. We literally just like push it in until it clasps from the inside. Just a simple pressing up on every corner, not in the middle so it doesn't snap. Next thing we have to pay attention to before we get the motherboard also into the case is make sure we pay attention to these standoffs that are right here. Depending on the case that you buy, you might have to install these, like screw them on there, and they'll just come with the case. It's just a hassle of making sure they're on there. These holes that have cutouts on the motherboard is where the standoffs will go. Something helpful is to use the IO shield as a reference, and then you'll be able to find the standoffs. All right, and with all the motherboard lined up and everything, it's as simple as literally grabbing the packet that came with the case and should come with your case with a bunch of screws in it, and the smaller ones will be the ones for the motherboard standoffs, and you just make sure it covers a good surface area, like every corner of the motherboard, and you should be fine. The next thing we should really worry about before we get to actually plugging all those tedious little connections to the motherboard is the storage. With that, you'll need the juice to the SATA, which is this that comes from the power supply. So you'll want to make sure your power supply supports as many drives as you're going to have. So this is the SSD we're going to be using. If you look at it closely, you'll notice places where you can screw it in at the bottom, and it should also have some on the side. It is finally time to plug everything together. So in my opinion, the true hardest part of this process is the cable management, because as you do this, you have to be worried about where you're going to route all your cables to and from. So that's really the most challenging part. Everything else, once you get the hang of it, is quite simple. So this is the 20+4 pin, and I'm going to route this right next to where it should go. Usually in the top left of the motherboard. Here in the middle right of the motherboard is a 24 pin cable that comes from the power supply. So this gives power to the motherboard, and this gives power to the CPU from both of these come from the power supply. So don't mind these cables. These are just the case cables that we'll worry about in a second. The two cables that you're going to connect, one should come from your box in the motherboard, and it will look like this. It is a SATA data, I like to call it, because you're getting data to the SATA from the motherboard. So this one's going to be connected to the drive, obviously, to the motherboard in order for it to communicate information. Now the other connector is going to be, or the other cable I should say, is going to be this one right here, which is also a SATA, but it comes from the power supply. So this is simply connected to SATA because it gives juice. The one coming from the power supply, which is this one, is usually wider, and this is the other one. It doesn't matter which side goes which, as long as it's connected in there. If we look here, there's a connection to SATA from the motherboard right here, so this is where that'll go. So this is where we finally pay attention to the case cables all of them should come with the USB, the HD audio, the USB 3.0, and these little power connectors. Luckily with these cases and the motherboard, they both help each other out in one, that they label the USB and the HD audio connections, and two, if we look here at the bottom, you'll see that there are little tiny visible labels right under each header. So there is the F, so we'll have the HD audio go over here. Now if you'll notice, this HD audio right here has a gap on the bottom. So you want to make sure it lines up with your motherboard. For the USB, there's a gap on the top on this side, the way I'm looking at it. So I'll want to make sure that is facing up. All right, next up is our USB 3.0, and that goes right in the slot where it says USB 3.0. All right, and lastly is the power and reset switch cables, which are the tiniest and look like this. These will go right here on this white header. You'll notice that at the bottom right here, we have power LED, HD plus and minus, power switch plus minus, the reset switch. So all those are in the order that you should be following to connect them. So this is our graphics card. It will come in this anti-static bag to prevent it from, like we mentioned earlier, any static electricity from you or from other components and permanently damaging it. What's important in this is that you actually don't apply too much force. So if you feel like you're applying too much force, you're probably doing it wrong. So now that we have our graphics card actually screwed in on the side over here and actually installed, it's in right now, we need for it to have power. And for that, we have the PCIe cable from your power supply, and it looks like this. It literally should say PCIe. There is two in case, you know, dual graphics cards, but we don't have that. So we'll just leave that aside, and it should go in that simple. Here's the thing. I 100% believe it's my responsibility to tell you this. These are precautions that you should take, or at least consider, when you're owning a computer and you're actually using it and stuff like that. So number one, I would recommend investing in a surge protector if you don't already have one. It helps in the just the cleanliness of having all your cables down there actually connected to just one thing instead of having multiple outlets. Also, it helps in case you have power outages and stuff like that. Definitely cleaning it, keeping it in a place where you know is not the ground and straight up filthy, and will receive airflow from the top, the bottom, and the sides and the back, is something that you 100% should consider, because at the end of the day, it could possibly affect your performance, and I can assure you it will 100% affect the lifespan of your computer. All right, guys, there's so much I still want to talk about. I think this video's been long enough so far, so I will make sure to cover a lot of what I want to talk about and what you want to see in separate videos. But for now, let me know if you guys enjoyed this video with a like and a comment down below. And subscribe for future content like this, because this was super fun to do. So thank you all for being here. I hope it was entertaining and informative. Yeah. Peace.